Jonathan.
Shalom.
Shalom. Is
I think you might be okay now.
Does Synod have another day, or was today the last day?
I think it's over.
It's over. So
the embargo is lifted.
If you're watching, Paul, Cedric, both of you, I expect you to jump on. That's why your picture's on it. So I don't think I actually watched the entire Wednesday afternoon thing. I don't know why it says I did, but they put Paul as the thumbnail.
Accident?
I don't think it was accident.
Coincidence, I should say. YouTube sometimes will show the whole bar is filled, even if it's something that you're midway through.
Oh, that might be.
I've noticed that. Yeah.
But it doesn't show it for that. I don't know, but I'm pretty sure I haven't watched anything today. I barely watched anything yesterday.
Okay. So I might have to jump sooner rather than later. So let's talk about today really quickly. I can give you a recap unless you want to watch any of it. Although it could be worth watching a little bit. I was so they just had the morning session and they actually just dealt with the banner. So you know the banner, right?
Yeah, that's the big thing. That was so they always leave the most controversial things till last.
Yeah. And so basically the gist of the motion or whatever they call it. What do they call those things? Articles or recommendations?
Overtures, I think.
Overtures, yes, sorry. Yeah. Was basically to make the banner more of an institutional mouthpiece and more in conformity with the confessions and orthodoxy and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And so most of the discussion was, of course, the usual suspects, arguing against that, like authoritarian or lack of diversity or whatever. But then there was another subthread that I thought was more interesting about how the banner's purpose has come and gone, and no longer this kitchen table metaphor is applicable because now we have a cafeteria, a mess hall, and it's called the internet. And there are a lot of places where diversity of viewpoints and spicy discussions and heterodox opinions can be hashed out, and it doesn't have to be the institutional mouthpiece or the institutional publication of the institution. And so I think that thread was like a subtext, but not kind of lost on some people. And so anyway,
the boomers don't understand the zoomers. That's shocking.
Yeah, well, then actually Paul got up and said precisely that. In so many words, he said we should listen to the young people in this situation, and kind of argue that the banner's time has come to change. And some people discussed too how new people would join the church, see the banner sitting in the lobby or whatever, pick it up and say, what the hell is this, and then leave, or just it's a source of scandal. And it's been that way, I'm sure, for decades now. The diversity of viewpoints in the banner is actually kind of a joke. It's the diversity of viewpoints in the academy. So how diverse is that?
So it's diverse as in we get to say all of the orthodoxies of left-wing craziness.
Yeah, it's the opposition paper for the CRC, and it's been that way for a long time, and so now it's being called to account. So but so there was a lot of discussion that they finally shut down after a while because it was just kind of getting repetitive. It was the same people spoke almost every single overture throughout most of the synod. So it almost feels like there's only. What's that?
What did Cedric have to say?
I don't even know that he got up actually for this one.
Oh, Cedric's the one who only speaks when he has something to say, and when he has something to say, it's worth listening.
Yeah, I think that's right. I don't remember him speaking, but if he did, it didn't surprise anybody. Let's put it that way.
He never does.
Yeah.
This is what I like about Cedric. Cedric needs to be a bishop of the CRC.
That's right. Yeah. And so it felt more contentious than some of the other things. And you could tell that there was a last gasp of some of the institutional power from, the prior generation. But the overture passed pretty cleanly. And there was actually there was an amendment proposed that was like adding a clause with much more teeth about that it would actually like promote orthodoxy and have like articles about confessional positions, basically like explicitly pushing for that institutional voice to come out. And anyway, that did not carry. I think it didn't make it to a vote, but they shut down the discussion of that pretty quickly too, because it was already getting to the point where it was like kind of just deteriorating into acrimony and emotion, and so it got shut down.
Okay, so I'm not understanding what's the difference between the first one and the second one.
The second one was an amendment, like they wanted to. It was an addition, a proposed like paragraph to be at the end of like the 3 or 4 paragraphs that existed. So they wanted to amend the overture with a appended paragraph that was like that was more explicit. So it was
okay. And
I think like probably was I would say it's probably a little bit overreaching, a little too draconian, because at that point you don't really have a publication that has any editorial control or freedom, independent. Like, you can't, it's got to have some play, right? You can't just turn it into a propaganda arm. I mean, you could, but that's kind of what I think it was looking to be. And I don't think it's like when you're winning and you're in power, like there's a point which you want to back off a little bit. I know, like we've had this discussion, right, where you sometimes you want to put your foot on the pedal even more and like really like twist the knife and like make sure that you root out the old.
Yeah.
So I mean, I guess
yeah, no, I mean, and there, look. I
want to make one last point. I mean, I think you would agree. It does seem though that the winning faction in Synod in the CRC right now does not have the stomach and the teeth to go scorched earth and really like they're still too accommodating, and like maybe it's to their credit to like some degree, right? That's where we could probably have a discussion, but I just they were obviously not willing to put some teeth into things. I don't know if you saw I posted like a little makeshift meme yesterday in the Kelvin channel in your Discord about Based Bethany, this woman who proposed some amendments last night about the RCA communion overture, and she was basically just
I didn't get it. Based Brittany, yeah.
You have to watch last night's debate around the overture having to do with the RCA, because she got up and she proposed some she put some amendments on the board that were like very explicit and to the point. That like, Cedric got up and supported, but again,
maybe I should go back and watch the one with Paul Vanderpocalypse on it.
Well, that was today.
Oh,
that was this morning. That was this morning. His overture that he was involved with was the banner one this morning. That's worth watching. And then last night's the evening one, right? So the Abide guys like Lloyd and stuff did their episode after the afternoon.
The video that Wednesday evening. The video that has Paul's face on it is the Wednesday afternoon.
One. Yeah, where he's
not the Thursday morning one. No, not the evening. So the evening was when they had Based Brittany. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, Based Brittany. Yeah. So I'm coining that here. I don't know who she is. She's in Grand Rapids North, so she's local. But anyway, Wednesday evening and this morning were good watching. and Paul's overture was this morning. He must have spoke. I think he spoke, in favor or whatever, for or against Wednesday afternoon, and that's why they grabbed his pick. So
okay. Yeah, no, he was there. He was talking about something else. I did see. Yeah. Okay.
So anyway, that's my report.
Okay. Yeah. No, I mean, I have to say, if you have one answer which is always right, then that's definitely wrong. And so if you have to always be willing to asur means forbidden.
What does that mean? A new forbidden from the Torah?
Hadash asur mehatorah. So it's kind of a joke. There is a prohibition in the Torah called Hadash, which refers to wheat that has grown after the most recent Passover, because there's a prohibition in the Torah about it, which frankly most people don't pay attention to, but it's an agricultural one. Anyway, the Chatam Sofer, a very prominent rabbi of about 100 years ago, jokingly used it when people wanted to do reforms, etc. in defending Orthodox Judaism. He said Chadash asur mehatorah, like anything new is forbidden from the Torah, which it's kind of it's a joke referring to the fact one of the 613 is referred to as the prohibition of Chadash, of new. So that's Chezi's joke.
So how does the joke apply to the context? Or does it?
I think he means in terms of like the banner, like discussing change, etc.
I got you. Yeah,
it's a wry joke to say that the Torah forbids anything new, because obviously that's not true.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Well, I think though that given the moment, there are plenty of other places for these conversations to happen, and
like my stream.
Sure,
I could replace the banner.
Yeah. All right, I may be back.
Okay. So what I was saying was that what I was saying is that anytime you have one answer which applies in every situation, you know that it's just not a good answer. It may be the default answer, but it's not a good answer. And so there definitely has to be a place where moderation, like you have to realize not to go too far. The question becomes, is this a situation in which the you have to dial it back or not? And I have to go back, as I do, to this counter Woodcraft, which apparently wow, you do observe Chadash. Chezi, why am I not surprised? It may surprise you to know I observed Chadash as well as back, but it's a difficult one. Okay, and which the Reverend Lloyd Hemstreet, no L in Hemstreet, said he has in his Amazon shopping cart. I think it's important. There is a question of exactly where and how the CRC should I mean, and ultimately it's up to them. And ultimately, like Lloyd said, God will do what God will do, and what God does is the best of things. Lo Yasuru. Yeah. So I guess we can start by watching Wednesday night's stream, because that apparently was spicy. Let's see.
Again, and we can get rolling. Litany.
Litanies, yay! Singing to their three gods.
Want to lay out our plan. We're going to pick it up in the middle of report 6D. We're still in recommendation 2, and we have the speaker queue as before, and so in a few minutes, Lydia is going to lead us off. We're going to try to make our way through the rest of this report, and knowing that we got something else coming, we'll talk about that in a second.
There's actually a lot of Korean-speaking churches within the CRC.
When we complete that tonight, we're going to call it an evening, because I sense we are fading, and we're not going to get everything done tonight. And so in the morning, we're going to come back. We're going to have a conversation about the mandate of the banner. We're going to ratify the ballots that we voted on today, and we're going to close in worship. And so that's kind of the schedule we have in mind. So we will certainly finish, not just by 3 o'clock tomorrow, but probably much earlier than that. But don't hop on a plane tonight. These are important conversations, and they happen to come at the end, and I know we're maybe not at our best. But these are significant, and so we want to both make progress forward and take them seriously. And so with that, we're going to turn it for a second back to you guys to kind of reorient us, because we've been gone for a little while.
Yeah.
And then we'll pick it up with, Israel's take his name off, with the rest of the queue.
I'll just offer this in case it's helpful to the body. I think what we had before dinner was just hearing a lot of passion for church planning. And I think it's really good that our officers gave us time to just hear those stories and hear that passion. I would say a lot of that was also expressed in the advisory committee differently, but it was present in the room. And I think there too, we reached a point where it's like, the image comes to mind of like, if you drive in Michigan in the winter, you sometimes get your wheels stuck in ice and snow. And you can be passionate about wanting to get moving and gun it really hard and hit the gas pedal really hard, but at some point, it's not actually helping you move forward. And it just seems like as a body, like passion, the energy is there to do something. At some point, we got to put some chains on the tires or try a different approach to actually get unstuck. So it sounds like there's some thoughts. We've seen some ideas. I had 2 or 3 good conversations just over dinner that this has spurred creative thinking about how churches and classes can partner together, which I think is exactly the kind of thing Resonate is hoping to spur forward. And we've got, I think, some ideas coming on how to do that. So what I'll offer to the body is if we can move through 2 and 3, and hopefully a fairly timely way, we'll have some more. We kind of took what we had as a committee as far as the best practical ideas and we put them on paper, but we knew they're limited and in many ways insufficient. But if we start with these, that doesn't mean there can't be others. And there are some others I know in the works. So,
okay. So with that in mind, also just a word. I've heard a bunch of numbers being thrown around. I don't know if they're accurate or not. But if we can't kind of confirm them, let's not guess on numbers, especially when they're really big numbers. And so, and plus, we can't decide numbers tonight. So that's just not in our purview. So we're still locking number 2 in 6D. In the queue, we have David Huizinga and Virgil Michael.
I have no idea what they're actually talking about.
David Huizinga, Lake Superior classes, the only binational classes. I'm in favor of 2. I've been involved in planting a number of churches personally and in sponsoring church plants wherever I have been positioned or wherever I've been pastoring. And it's interesting that we are struggling and perhaps feel bad, perhaps even feel guilty, that we are deficient in funding Resonate with church planting funds.
So I guess they're talking about Resonate, which is they keep on renaming their efforts. So GN asked 2 questions. How many synods do these guys have, bro? They have a synod every year in June. Actually, apparently the RCA went to a once every 2 year synod model, which actually it seems to me might not be the worst of ideas, especially in this day of internet. Things are different. Why do we care? Aren't they tiny? They're not that tiny. I mean, you're talking. I mean, I'm Jewish. They have 100,000 members. That's larger than, I think, the largest Hasidic court, Satmar, is around that amount. I mean, just in terms of comparison. But I guess as far as Christians are concerned, CRC is pretty small. But yeah, we care because Paul Vanderclay, and there's a lot of CRC people around here, but Paul Vanderclay's pretty prominent, because these are our buddies. Yeah. And not just because of that. I think the CRC has, out of all of the various evangelical parts, they have. I mean, if you can call them evangelical, they're reformed. They seem to have dealt with the culture wars better than most places have, and that's why. I think a lot of us are looking at how society can, like what Don says, which I'll read soon enough. About this the other day. My brain always reads it as that synod over there, which is odd since synod seems to be plural. No, I think synod is singular. CRC is rare for successfully pushing back against the progressivist takeover of Christian churches. That's the thing. That's the thing. Gotta skip Lance. Lance is the intrepid reporter who knows all things CRC. We've been depending on his watchful commentary. Lance is back. Yeah. What did McMo say? They're talking about pointing the CRC's attention and investment towards church planters, basically startups. Okay. Lance, how have you been? It's been a while.
I've been okay. I was thinking the same thing. Super busy work time for me. So I kind of did a digital. I did a digital fast during Lent, so I was like totally disconnected.
You work for a school district, don't you?
Yeah, Association of Christian High Schools. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's summer. Shouldn't this be your least busy time?
Well, I'm a CFO, and so our financial year end is June 30.
Right. Okay.
So we're finalizing everything, and we start preparing all of our audit stuff and close our books out. July, auditors start showing up in August. So for me, it's one of my biggest times of year, and we're preparing a whole bunch of things because August, the private school, most people are ready to enroll, but you get a lot of new folks that try and contracts and financial aid. So it's actually, we get a little less traffic from teachers, but it's that time of year where we got to get a lot of other things done. So.
Okay. How was the digital fast?
It's good. It's good. It's good. So, I think we all should just do. I mean, I wasn't totally, but I tried to really cut back. I paid attention. So, X is my newspaper. Like my dad used to get the newspaper every morning.
Yeah.
The newspaper. So, I did stay connected a little bit on that stuff, but I didn't engage or whatever. So, anyway, and I'm not a CRC expert. I've just been a very close observer over the past 4 years of the CRC synods.
I'll be. Jacob has had way too much No, I don't have any brothers, although Lance is kind of my brother from another mother. But like if there wasn't a war between Iran and Israel, I might have been paying more attention to the CRC. But like with everything else, I actually haven't watched most of this year's Synod. That's why I've been relying on you and double dipping into your streams and stuff. Your X post I read the other day was actually really good, and generally your X posts have been you've been the one reporting on Synod better than the banner. You know how I found out you? So what I did was I hadn't seen it, so I went to Grok. I'm like, Grok, what happened at the Synod today? And it pulled up CRC's official X profile, and it pulled up an article from the banner, and then it had Lance. And I'm like, hey,
oh no!
there we go, Lance. And I clicked on that and read it, and it was like, well, Grok knew. It kind of bothered me, like it doesn't come up on the algorithm. Like, we have so little control over what we see based on the algorithm. Like, I would want the algorithm to bring up your stuff, but unless I go to, like, there are a few accounts, and you don't post that often. Like, for me to remember to go
poster.
Yeah. So yeah, let's talk war, honestly. That's what happened last night. We started on a CRC stream and we ended up talking about the war. But when I do war streams, nobody comes on. So like I don't know.
Yeah, I'm interested. Let's just put a button on. I watched for most part, and I fell asleep. You were kind of reviewing the live stream we did with Christian, and I think one of the things we said, and I think you had caught on to who I had mentioned, the emotional screw tightening of the past 4 and 5 years is gone, and they still need to be diligent. They still need to button some things up. But my impression, I would just say that I did think was, and I think maybe one of your critiques of me was that be careful of the moderation, right? Because
I'm worried. I am worried that you moderate, and apparently it happened with the Methodists, right? These people have long memories and long. I will tell you about Tucker and Cruz. I started listening to it last night, and I couldn't go to sleep. I was so angry. It was so stupid. It was so stupid. Like, Tucker's overdosing on red pills and barfing all over. Like, he's become a debate bro. Like, I can't. It was ugly.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I would just say, having spent, and I actually went back and watched previous synods, just not all of it, but I just wanted to get a good sense, because I'm like any good nerd in the corner. Once I go down a rabbit hole, I keep going down rabbit holes. And I do think what has happened is even, someone like a Paul or whatever, like, they've made the decision that they are staying traditional CRC confessional. And it's really not up for debate anymore. I think a good thing. So, and so I do, like, if I were there, and I would be, I would have been a guy who was part of Abide. Absolutely. Right. Mm-hmm. Because they needed to have a place to communicate, because there's no way the banner was ever going to put any of your viewpoints in the banner. But I thought, like, the banner vote this morning was really interesting. Mm-hmm. And you'll know what I mean by this. They basically said that they had to, because it's the publication of the CRC, it's like the front door. It has to basically stay within the mandate of the synodical decisions, and it's got to represent the CRC, right? You can't have a whole bunch of affirming ideology stuff in a denomination, articles and everything else. So Paul chaired that committee, and so they basically said, hey, you've got to be in line with synodical decisions. And they had some this was a mandate that was improved in 2015 that they kind of redlined and marked up. And it was interesting, as I went back to 2015, I went to actually go watch the synod. This really was an attempt of the progressives to try and be able to say, hey, we want to be able to have diverse views in the banner, and they wanted to have basically the ability to do what they were doing, right?
So by diversity, they mean left-wing orthodoxy. Yeah, because I guarantee you they're not having a diverse view about whether or not racism is good or women should not be allowed to speak in church.
Well, so for example, surprisingly, Jacob, there have been no articles about whether women's ordination is should be allowed.
Yeah. But it's diversity, you see. It's diversity.
So one of the things was, and I knew this as soon as I saw, and Paul chaired this committee. As soon as I saw that they struck the word diverse views to basically say church's views. So that when you start striking out the word diversity for certain people, because what are they about? That's been one of their mantras. That's been one of their that's been one of their religious beliefs, is diversity, right? And I knew that word would strike a chord, but today they voted like 131 for the changing it to bring them into compliance. It was 131 to 36 to 3. And basically, of those 36, primarily most of those were Canadians. So, and they're going to deal with some of that. So I guess like your concern about moderation is it just really appears that they've reached a steady state that we're going to stick with the traditional views of Christianity as it relates to a lot of this stuff. And I thought that word diverse, because boy, that's a triggering word. You're going to strike out diverse, and there were some people.
So
there were some comments on the
it
floor.
out on their previous iteration of the banners. So the banner's mission used to say diverse views, and now it's changing to say church views.
Let me pull it. Wait a minute. Okay. Here we go. I want to see if I can share on the screen. I'll just show you what they did. It wasn't too drastic, but it was basically, okay. And let's see if I can share my screen here.
You should be able to.
Let me come here. Pull this out. I'm going to pull you out. Let's go StreamYard. Present. Okay. Let's see. Is it being shared?
Yeah.
We need to zoom in. Okay. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so this is the Synod has a synodical mandate and guidelines. They basically tell the banner, because it is the denomination's publication, what they should do. So basically, what you're seeing here is they left a lot of things.
We have PVK.
Is he here?
The ban is over.
He's this was his committee that just got decided this morning.
We're looking. It says Chair Reverend Paul Vanderpocalypse, reporter Lance. I forgot your last name, Lance. But yeah, so we're looking at the actual thing. So Paul, how was it? Are you glad it's over? Was the Holy Spirit in the room with you?
It was a good synod. It was a healing synod. Not everybody got everything they wanted, which is normal for synod.
The votes were. I didn't see any close votes as far as I was able to see.
No close votes.
That's good.
Yeah. It's a. After all of the synod stuff from 2022 to 2024, this was a synod, people trying to figure out if they could trust each other again. And obviously there's a lot of people who are no longer in the room. Those disaffiliating are that they were greater in influence than they were in number in many respects, because they were from the portion of the church that had very much dominated the church. There still are people who don't know if they, they're sitting on the edge. They don't have to leave. They wonder if this is the place for them, those kind of things. But in some ways, it was a synod that was just trying to figure out, okay, can we trust each other? Can we work together? How do we rebuild trust? These kind of things. So a lot of a lot of adjustments. In some ways, what we did this morning was probably one of the more consequential things. Not necessarily, I think symbolically, it was one of the bigger issues, because the banner for the denomination has been that was for, let's say, really up until, let's say, the 1990s, when the media changed even more into the internet age. The banner was sort of the contact point for many people between the denomination and the household, besides the church. And so I knew that the vote wasn't going to be close, but I knew it was that there's a certain segment of the denomination that's really going to feel this.
Mhm.
So,
Oh yeah, especially like Lance was saying, striking out the word diversity. That's like their holy words are being assaulted.
buzzwords are holy words. And, if I would say to someone that their spouse is seeking a diversity of marriage partners, they wouldn't think the diversity was such a great word. But I knew that striking that word would just, regardless of the meaning in the context, would just be an emotional thing. And it was interesting that people keyed into that on the screen. So I thought about that with the committee. But when you work on a committee, I'm chairing the committee. I'm for the most part facilitating the committee. My job is to have the committee do its job.
Who chose for you to be the head of the committee?
So at the last year's executive team, together with some denominational people, when they see the roster for who can be at Synod, they ask who is willing to serve chairing advisory committees. And actually, I was talking to one of the officers who did it, and he said, it was really hard to cover all the committees. So most of the people, I think, if not all, who put themselves forward saying they'd be willing to, and if they had some synodical experience, were then officers or alternative officers on a committee. So it's fairly random, actually.
I would very much like you to read this book, PVK.
Well, I got to do this from my phone, because after
it's called Counter Wokecraft by Charles Pincourt and with James Lindsay. And I have been recommending it for several years on these CRC Synod things. It's a short book, and the Reverend Lloyd Hemstreet has promised me that it's in his Amazon thing. I would very, very much like you to read this book, Paul.
So, Paul, as a counterbalance to Jacob, and I don't know if you heard that when we came in, Christian and I had a conversation about this last night. I was struck, like I've watched the past 4 years. It's been actually, Synod's been fairly contentious for 6 to 7. This thing's been building and building. There seemed to be let's just say, a surge of the elite movement in 16 and 17. They kind of had a bit of a rise, and I think they were pushing to have that. And then we obviously witnessed what's happened the past 3 years. I was struck that I sensed that this felt so much more like synods I've seen, non-controversial synods I've seen of other denominations. I was struck by, there's certainly, you always have disagreements. It felt like there was a move to moderation that I felt was good. There were these pretty much, some people had some very differing opinions on things. Yet when the votes came about, overwhelmingly, even if there was contentious discussion, I was really impressed. I saw what you guys did, which I read the overtures. You guys found the middle ground versus the hostile takeover of the banner, which was one of them, right? And then it was just, hey, let's just work on the mandate. Yes, it is. It has to represent the denomination. I thought it was, I found myself in that position. I was most impressed with the minority report disappeared on the CRC. They came together with their unified position. And I would have been moved that if a group like that, because it's contentious,
On the RCA, on the RCA point.
on the RCA,
Yeah.
that they came together and found it together, and that passed overwhelmingly because it's a sticky wicket. What I was struck by, and if I were a member of the CRC, I would, because it is where it is, right? The people have to for the people moving forward, I would be encouraged that I think that there is a real communion to be able to move forward. Lots to discuss, virtual church, lots of things. But was that the sense of you guys at the Synod? Because it screamed loudly to me.
Yeah, very much, very much. It was, I think, a Synod that people wanted.
Somebody posted this on my Discord. I have no idea what it means, but apparently, Based Brittany is someone that you guys recognize.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. She has an opinion. She was very nice bringing it up, but she's very traditional.
Yeah. So no, it was and even when we had majority and minority reports, the reports were so similar. So I think it was very much a Synod where people wanted to sort of come back together, be willing to compromise, live with the compromise, at least between the groups that are still there, and try to lower, I've said before, in some ways, what happened in the CRC is that with respect to confessionality, they turned up the temperature on confessionality like a fever in order to attack something. And once that is pretty much resolved, the question is, will the fever go down? Will the rhetoric turn down? And I think this Synod was a step in that direction. And it was probably one of the most unified synods that I've seen ever. Now again, there's an element that had been fighting that is no longer in the room, and that's a part of it. There are still other segments of the church that are asking hard questions. Do we fit in this denomination? Is this the denomination for us? It's one thing to ask that in the abstract. It's another to look at what your other options are as compared to the CRC. And so, I think it was, again, it was not a Synod that everybody got everything they wanted, by no means. If you looked at sort of there were a number of issues that the conservatives didn't necessarily get everything they wanted, and you'd hear voices 100%. On the right wanting more, but they didn't get it. And so there very much was a sense of, okay, let's relax, let's settle down, let's try to move forward. But if you caught last night's, if you remember a few years ago, I did a video on Scott Vanderpocalypse. Reverend Vanderpocalypse goes to Synod.
Yeah. I tweeted about it yesterday. I love seeing you.
And Scott's a master. And Scott, once again, if Scott sends an overture to Synod, no advisory committee should try to blunt his overture, because he will own you on the Synod floor. But being able to get Synod to say something like, we're going to put together a global church planting plan, doesn't necessarily mean that's going to come down into the church. So now we did a video last night, talked about that issue a lot. And like I said, on my little camera, somebody else turned the camera off. And if you long press the button, it cancels the recording, but there's a chance it's still on the SD card. So I'm running some recovery software for a few hours, hoping I can recover that video. So,
So that was a video with Vanderpocalypse?
no, I didn't have Scott on that. I'm going to have Scott on the channel. That was a video with Rod Hugan and Nate Van Denen and some of the other pastors, and who just after Synod, we were just sort of talking through things. And so I've got a bunch of videos of those coming out because I couldn't release things during the gag order, but I could record.
Oh, yeah.
So some things will come, and I've got something uploading now, but I've got, college Wi-Fi to deal with. So it's not exactly the speed that I have at
Well, I love
church.
his
College
passion.
Wi-Fi is usually pretty good. I mean, I don't know about Calvin University, but it's usually pretty
No,
good.
we're in Redeemer in Ancaster,
Oh,
Canada.
right.
It was in Canada. Is
Well,
that why Herb didn't come this year?
Yeah.
What's that?
Is that Herb doesn't have a passport? Or was Herb there?
Herb didn't come, but the first day there was one guy who came up in bib overalls. I just laughed. And then Herb's pastor came up to me and said, oh, I just want to, apologize for unleashing Herb on Synod. I said, no, don't apologize. Herb should be at Synod. Herb represents a good solid amount of Dutch farmers and people. So Herb was on the ballot. Herb is gonna be on some board, I think. So
hey, good for her.
So yeah, but it was again the Christian Reformed Church has changed. Synods 2022 to 2024 has remade the map. And again, this banner issue was, I knew when I saw that on my committee that, but the committee was unanimous. We didn't have a minority report. The committee was very unified, and I didn't know that coming into it because, and the debate on the floor was, more combative, but I figured it was going to win and win easily, and then eventually it did. But this is going to be a difficult thing.
I suspect with that there were if you've actually watched people, there were new people, but you kind of get a sense. I could tell a few of the people of your generation that got up and spoke in favor of it. I could sense a few of them absolutely were people who certainly you wouldn't call the conservative or the traditional camp, but they understood what you guys were doing there. Like something had to be done now that the decisions were made that were made.
Yep.
The other thing I think, Paul, which is, and I know it's a matter because everyone's talking about my grandma and like this is such a emotional time, but in many ways, really the banner's a relic of the past when you think about how you're going to start communicating, YouTube, other things. And so I think the younger generation gets that. It was emotional. And I love Scott Vanderpocalypse because at the end of the day, as I sit back, the things he brings up, actually, that's the focus of the domination needs to be there, because if this doesn't get figured out, it's going to be a small little remnant. If you don't turn the decline around, then you got to sell a bunch of buildings, harken down. And so he's talking about the real nuts and bolts of what you want to focus on instead of all this other compliance stuff.
That's right.
I have 3 comments, and then I want to hear what you have to say about them. Number 1, I think Herb should be a professor of systematic theology at Calvin. I definitely think he should. Number 2, you always said, Paul, that who the officers are and how that election goes kind of tells you how Synod goes. And because of that, I thought, since it was it was obvious abide people, I thought it would be much more of an abide Synod, and it didn't seem that way to me. And number 3, I thought the discussion on MAID was when I saw that, it made me think, okay, this is the CRC work of Synod that I like want to see the CRC. I want to see I want to see churches in general. I want to see religious leadership in our country, right? And so that conversation, and I said this to Lloyd, what is my problem with all of the woke bullshit is that it drowns out the prophetic voice that something like the CRC should have for something like MAID.
Which one do you want me to talk about first?
It's your show.
It's your channel. The MAID conversation.
Why can't Herb be a professor of systematic theology? That's the most important question.
the MAID, because he's got stuff to do. We elected, we didn't elect, but we have 2 new professors of systematic theology. I don't know if you saw their interviews.
I did, and Cedric called him out on his social Trinitarianism, which was really impressive.
Yeah. Cedric is Cedric. He is one of a kind. But that was an important session for this synod, because again, this was something that there's no division on in the church. This is something that all of us, I thought the report was very well received. It was a good report. It showed some of the skills, and it was, even though, there are certain states that have similar laws to what Canada has, what's happening in Canada is very different. And so that was, I think, a really important moment for this synod, where we could say, okay, we've got some things we're working through within us, but this is something that we can all agree on. And so that was. Now, I did wonder during that, however, if the absence of some of those who have disaffiliated, if that would have changed the debate. I don't know. I can only judge from reading posts from some people on CRC Voices who, but the church was very united on that, and that it was predominantly a Canadian issue was also important, because another one of the big moments was this vote on whether if there should be a separate synod for Canada, because there was a Towards Canada movement that was sort of a activist group that had been, especially after the HSR, had been, fomenting that CRC Canada needs to split from the USA, et cetera, et cetera. And that vote was far stronger than I think anyone anticipated. There was 171 for, 3 against, and 1 abstaining. It was crazy. So even though we didn't do electronic voting with the assisted suicide conversation, we didn't have to. There were no negative votes. We voted electronically on that other one, and some people would have said, well, because there are more American delegates there, the Americans can get their way. But with only 3 dissenting votes, it was a clear signal that most of the Canadian church says, we're going to stick with the CRC. We're going to stick with binationality, and that's our better way forward. Because again, when they're discontent in their denomination, the choice isn't, do I stay or do I go? The choice is, do I stay or where would I go? And no denomination is perfect. And so you deal with that.
So the Canada thing is actually something I've paid a little bit more attention to than anything else, because particularly my interest in institutions and laws and politics. And from what I have seen, it's very much the delusional boomerism that you've kind of been talking about, people who just aren't reading the room. the people towards CRC Canada really seem to not be reading their room in Canada.
Canadians see things differently often. There's a long history of, so usually there's like a Canadian director of Canadian ministry, and that's part of the denomination. And there's a long history of people resigning or being fired with a fair amount of acrimony from that position. Part of what happened around the time of COVID is that the Canadian Revenue Authority instantiated some laws that basically said, if Canadian nonprofit money is going to efforts that are connected to a foreign entity, which the United States Michigan Corp is, for those gifts to be tax deductible, there have to be joint ministry agreements between a Canadian entity and then the foreign entity, which in this case is the American entity. And so what actually we did, this would have been a big issue in Synod 2022 that I went to, and I was on the advisory committee for that, is there was a fairly good overhauling of the relationships between the Michigan Corp, which is the legal entity beneath the Christian Reformed Church in the United States, and then Canada Corp, which is the legal entity for the Canadian properties and ministries. And what started there was a restructuring, and for anything that is happening that touches Canada, there has to be a negotiated joint ministry agreement between board members that are Canadian and board members that are American. It's usually 2 and 2, where they have to hammer out an agreement. And so I think part of what was reflected in that vote was they've done a lot of work on these joint ministry agreements. And I think a lot of the people who are watching Canadian ministries closely see that a lot of past things have been rectified. And for the most part, Canadian board members are in charge of Canadian ministries. And, for the most part in the United States, there hasn't been, Americans just sort of forget. Americans don't pay attention beyond our border. And that can be a point of annoyance for Canadians. But now with these joint ministry agreements and the restructure, my sense is that people are satisfied with that end of it. Canada is a different environment in a number of ways. And there are some of the more progressive churches are in Canada. And so I think part of what happened with the HSR was that those who had been wanting separation saw this as an opportunity to, we don't like these Americans with their HSR telling us what to believe on human sexuality, but there are many conservative Canadian churches too. And so, there's a reason that you have synods and representatives.
Did you see this video anticipating Synod 2025 towards CRC Canada's website,
No.
the YouTube channel?
No.
I think it's worth your time. It's about an hour long though, and they had a discussion. These are the people who were advocating. The guy who was moderating the discussion, it was his overture came from his classis, I believe, right? Or his fellowship, he said, and I didn't know. What is a fellowship in the CRC? Like,
that's not an ecclesiastical term.
Okay.
Isn't that just the name of the church? It's something Netherlands Fellowship or something from Ancaster?
So that is so they are a congregation that is very close to this campus. I almost walked there Sunday for church, but somebody else invited me to a different church, so I went to a different church. But that church, a number of members of that church came for the vote then and to watch it. So apparently that's the movement is sort of coming out of that church, but they couldn't get their classis to sign off on their overture, which always says something.
Yeah. Yeah. And even within the discussion, I mean, it was an interesting discussion. Particularly, I mean, I was just sitting there going, boomer, 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 you know.
Well, the overture referenced the 51st state and the political, like they hate Trump. Like it was so to get past the boomer stuff a little bit, Jacob. It was dripping with this whole don't like the conservative American, and then the guy who wanted us to go through a struggle section over our American exceptionalism. I found that interesting on the floor. But by and large, I would just say is it became very apparent from a breadth of Canadians that they wanted nothing to do with this disaffiliation. And if you look at like Scott Vanderpool's numbers, I mean, just think about it. Like, you know, splitting up, where you go then? I mean, it's a tough world out there, and you're facing headwinds, and in many ways, you know, it just seemed to me, and I think even those who would not consider them conservative at all, like the fact they mentioned, I want to be part of a binational church, and I don't want to just be a binational church. I want to be part of a church. So I think that movement, Paul, and I watched that too, Jacob. It's just dead on arrival. I think they probably got there to some extent.
It was obvious from their discussion. That was the thing. This video was like from 2 weeks ago, and I could listen to them admitting that, but it was like they didn't want to see. It was really interesting. The other discussion I actually found very interesting, which I did see, was over the guns in church.
Another Canadian over
Two Canadians told me that they thought that this overture was designed to provoke distance between the U.S. and Canadian delegates. But I mean, here in the United States, we're so used to people fighting over this. Most Americans were like, what? And so it just didn't go anywhere.
See, if it had been my church, I would definitely have had an overture recommending that every CRC church be openly welcoming of the people who conceal carry, and that all deacons should undergo training with firearms, and should definitely consider that, because it is part of their Christian duty to defend the weak and their congregation, and part of your role as a pastor to know how to use a gun.
Well, I'm not a gun person, but the overture didn't really go anywhere.
No, it was overwhelming. Well, on the flip side of that, so you know, I'm CFO of Association of Christian Schools, and so that's a big deal to us because schools are targets. And actually, the statistics would say that if you do have weapons there, actually it would stop the carnage and stuff. However, in Texas, they've built this whole Guardian program where they it's not like having everyone walk in there, but if you go through a very specified training, you get all this stuff, and then you can kind of get some insurance for it. But we had a long discussion at the board because I'm a lawyer too. Liability, what happens if we don't do it and we do it, and da-da-da-da-da. But if you actually dig down deeper and not just have this visceral, well, guns are bad situation, it's something as a board you have to sit and actually we needed to think about it, because we actually thought about it. Well, other schools are doing this. What happens if we don't do this? And
well,
anyway.
And so part of, again, if you look at the baptism question,
what was the baptism question?
There was an overture, basically. So the question is, generally speaking, local church councils have jurisdiction over saying yes or no to requests for baptism. And some people, there was an instance where one of the churches that has since in the process of disaffiliating had baptized a child of a same-sex couple.
Oh.
And that was sort of, so that they some people were trying to get baptism involved in the human sexuality fight. And so part of what was happening was, because in this fight, what tends to happen in a fight like this is that everything gets pulled up to the synodical level, when in the Christian Reformed Church, you have a synod, a classis, and a local congregation, and they're all supposed to have their specific domains of authority. And so in the baptism question, the authority of the local church to decide baptisms was affirmed once again and reinforced. So and so just like with the firearms conversation, this synod tried to sort of rebalance things again and say, we're not going to try and pull everything up to the denominational level. Local churches have their domains of authority, classis does, and synod does, and they all have to sort of keep to their own domains. Otherwise, basically the balance, things get off balance. So.
And Paul, I thought that was one of the first votes that I saw that where I started to see the moderation. It was like, okay, wow, and it felt good. I'll tell you something I said on Christian's live stream, and before you go, I want you to hear this. The CRC, I think, has found its way through this better than any denomination that I have seen. As painful as it was, and quite frankly, what I see, which is I think something that I think is a feature of Roman Catholicism and a feature of Orthodoxy, you guys don't move quickly. And the fact that you don't move quickly, and even the RCA issue, the 5 years would seem like forever. Well, who knows? The RCA, there might be a split happening in 2 years, and maybe the traditionalists are there, or maybe it'll be fully affirming. Who knows? Whatever. There's a slowness that you guys have with task force, and let's wait, like let's deliberate, like how you approach virtual church. Yeah, probably not a church, but I'm not really quite ready to define things yet. Let's watch things devolve, and maybe we could define things better a few years down the road. I felt like there's a slowness as compared to some might happen in a non-denominational where you move real quick and we're gonna get something in a quarter. I think your slowness. I gain a lot of respect for you guys have, I think, a really as good a polity structure in the Protestant churches as I've seen. And it withstood probably, this was more of a, was this a hotter pressure test than women in ordination, or was it about the same?
Well, it's difficult to say because, again, women in ordination was from like the 70s to the 90s. And again, that was a totally different media environment. You had some politicking through interest groups, but they had to use print media. And but also at the beginning of the women in office issue, there was a consensus emerged that this was not going to be a confessional issue, which both slowed it down, but also gave it, you couldn't resolve it easily. And what happened with the women in church office issue was that you had just successive senates going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Things were just razor thin. In that sense, it's more like American politics, where the parties are just so close in many ways. And, but people like to connect those issues. And I can understand how they do, but I think they're fundamentally different issues. Mm-hmm. And so it was, and that's in many ways why why those who are disaffiliating, why one of the big mistakes they made, because they thought we're just going to use the same playbook for this issue, and it played totally differently, and the church was different. So yeah.
Well, and I think the slowness, and this is something else I mentioned, and things have changed a lot in our country, and I would just say the center's views have changed from when we started off in 2008, where I'll be honest with you, when they were doing civil unions and they just wanted people to have the same contractual rights or whatever, call me a heresy and an awful person. I was like, oh, whatever, that's fine. Like, it really didn't hit my radar, Paul. I'm like, good, you do you. I stand for God, you stand for God, whatever, I don't think. And then So had this come together quickly, you probably would have had a lot more moderates who probably it would have been closer. But as the slowness of this playing out allowed people to stand on the sidelines and go, oh, gender reassignment surgery. Oh, drag queen story hour. Oh, these people that are being fully affirmed are actually just as depressed and suicide. Like, wait a minute, this stuff's not working out. As you started to see more and more of it play out. That I think had the vote happened in like 2012 or 13, it might have been different. But I think the slowness of Synod and how you guys move through things, I think ultimately ended up where you're at today. And again, I'm highly impressed, and I do think that as difficult as it was, and it's not good, it is a divorce. There's a lot of hurt, but you're going to have to go through this. I don't know of another denomination that's watching the Synod that has found themselves in the position that you guys have found yourselves in.
Yeah.
I think it helps that you're smaller.
Yes.
I think the subsidiarity does creates a structure, right? So when Paul talks about the Synod, classis, church structure, right? That is classic subsidiarity, and it is a fundamental rule of hierarchy. You have to have that subsidiarity, and I don't know any other Protestant non-Episcopal organization that has that type of polity that I have seen.
Yeah. It's helpful to remember that the CRC's roots are, with painful schisms over the years. And so in some ways, like the URC that split from the CRC in the 90s, they went to a federation. But a federation is basically congregationalism. And people like congregationalism in the short term, but historically what happened with congregational churches is that once they got a pastor in, for some reason, that pastor then could take the church all kinds of different ways. And so the CRC tries to keep these things balanced. And even some of the subtle differences between the CRC and the RCA. The RCA had healthy majorities, probably at least as large as the CRC, trying to discipline churches on the East that were violating their own rules. It's very interesting when you go through like the United Methodists, the Reformed Church in America, most of these denominations that have sort of been shredded over this issue of human sexuality, in many cases, the leadership was violating the rules of the denomination. And so it was basically a breakdown of order. And you saw that with the United Methodists, because it just went on and on. And so the CRC has gotten out of this relatively unscathed, but we are still, Scott gave some numbers from the floor where he had projected, and we're down about 186,000, but that's before counting the disaffiliating. And so we don't quite know how many people that will be, but it's going to be way smaller than the break in the 90s over women in office. So the break in the 90s might have been 40 to 60,000 people. This looks like maybe 10,000 people. Mm-hmm. So we'll see.
Apparently you had 80 some disaffiliating ordained people, something like that.
Yeah. A large percentage of them are women, and a large percentage of them are some people already retired, and then also people who weren't necessarily pastors of churches. There were staff positions, there were denominational staff positions. And so that number, and the great majority of them are in the West Michigan, Grand Rapids area. Those churches in Grand Rapids East that are disaffiliating had many denominational former retirees, which leads to, high numbers in terms of the clergy disaffiliating. But and so it's been interesting because of what was set up in 2014 with the Reformed Church in America. Clergy could sort of easy just hop to the Reformed Church in America in terms of sort of trying to preserve their credential. But most churches that are in the process of disaffiliating are not going anywhere yet. Unlike the RCA, where their rules of grace of separation meant they gave it. In the RCA, your building is owned by your classis. In the CRC, your building is owned by your local church. That's a huge difference, especially from the Presbyterians and the Methodists. So in the RCA, they had a period, basically a grace period, where churches could leave the RCA, but they had to go to a denomination. And so that's where this Alliance of Reformed Churches was founded. That gave people a landing pad so they could leave the RCA and go to the ARC. But there's some early indications that the ARC is going to sort of be a holding pattern, and that some of these churches are probably going to want to think to go to another denomination. And so some might come to the CRC, which a lot of RCAs, they looked at the CRC in the late 20-teens and said, how do we know that you're not going to have the same problems we were having? And I think after 2024, they could probably look at the CRC and say, CRC is not going to change on this issue. So we might pick up some churches from the Reformed Church in America. So that would be helpful.
I do want to let you just talk about whatever you want to talk about, because we've been peppering you with questions, but I also have to ask you about virtual churches.
Well, you guys know probably better than anybody here that on one hand, we continue to be surprised by what we can do over the internet. But on the other hand, there's also things you really can't do over the internet. And so that's why I've always been, I've always had estuary, and I've always told people to go to a real church and have a real pastor. But the majority and minority reports were so razor thin. The one thing that sort of, I think, it stopped me, and I think the majority of others, when they looked at that minority report and they just said, definitively, it's not a church. That might then, let's say someone wants to try and do something new. It might just, make it more difficult to continue to grow into this strange world we're entering. I think most people recognize, 5 years ago, 5 years from now is going to look more different than 5 years ago looked, partly just because of AI. And maybe. So we don't know. And so I think most people said, receive the report as information. Even the one pastor who did start a virtual church, he's trying to organize in-person gatherings. It's just a natural part of it. So basically the idea was, this is a task force, not a study committee. We're going to learn a lot as the years go in. Why make a definitive statement now when it seems we don't know a lot? Let's just be patient, continue to look at things, and then we're going to revisit this issue again and again and again in many ways. And I think for the most part, we tend to do our best work with things like this sort of from the bottom up. And, what's happening with me is unique in the CRC. And we just don't know. So I was glad that we received the report and said, thanks for the report. We can learn some things, but a lot of crazy stuff is going to continue to happen.
What's that distinction you made between a task force and a study committee?
So a few years ago, part of what, whenever you have a big fight like human sexuality, a whole bunch of things that were sort of implicit have to get clarified. And so there are different levels. So if Synod has a question, what can it do with a question? Because Synod is like 10 days of crazy schedule. So you can only do so much of the Synod. So one of the things you can do is ask the Office of General Secretary, which is basically denominational staff, and then maybe he'll have some staff people come back a year later with an answer. But remember, this is June, and basically, if you want to get things in for next year, a lot of stuff has to be wrapped up by January, February, so years are short. So you can ask the Office of General Secretary, you can ask Council of Delegates, which are delegates from the denomination that can have little study committees and have standing committees. Or in the past, the CRC way was to create a study committee. But study committees are expensive because they usually take 3 to 5 years. You're flying people around the country. And so a couple of years ago, they said, we need some smaller things. And so one of the things they did was say, a Synod can name a task force. And a task force is like a 2-year assignment because one is too short. And we're going to name a few people and they're going to work on something and come back with a report. And that's what happened. And so it has less weight than a study committee because a study like the Human Sexuality Report was a 5-year study committee. And something like that could cost $40,000 or $50,000 just in expenses. And, lots and lots of hours, often of seminary professors' time, ministers' time. So they did that. So Synod isn't always just saying, we need a study committee on this, we need a study committee on that. It could just get too expensive.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
my question for you, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and I noticed this has been noted from the floor, but the Office of Secretary General, like they get assigned a whole bunch of, like I was my mind's thinking because I get signed work and I have all these hard projects to do, and I start stacking up in my head. I'm like, oh my gosh, they've got to pull it. They're going to have to their regular jobs, and then they're going to pull this together, and they're going to pull this together, and we're going to have them do this, and they're going to report on this. I just see all this work getting created, and this team you probably need to have to pull it off, which you probably don't have that large of a team because of budgets and everything else. That's a hard job.
Yeah. For one thing, because of our structure, any member of the Christian Reformed Church can overture Synod. So sometimes you get overtures that are just like, somebody on the floor of Synod or advisory committee might have a bright idea that we should do X, and Synod doesn't know what to do with it, so it throws it to the executive director. It's also the case that part of what's happening is that we're obviously in numerical decline, which leads to greater fiscal constraints, which means that there's less and less staff to do things. So one of the things that my committee talked about on the first day was they're studying governance costs. The Christian Reformed Church basically has two things it does. There's governance, which is basically Synod and church support things. And then there's shared ministries, which is like world missions, church planting, radio ministry, these kinds of things. And traditionally, they've all been in one pot. And so one of the things they're probably going to do is separate those two things a bit and really take a look at governance costs, because like a synod like this costs, just the event itself costs $500,000. You've got all the travel. And then when you look at staff time spent on synod, you're probably easily over $1 million just on synod. So there's gonna be some changes, and there's going to be some changes in terms of downsizing. Probably try to regularize classes in the United States, because we've got some big ones, we've got some small ones, and now with disaffiliation, there'll be things moving around. So they're going to be making some changes to try to reduce costs.
Was the RCA always a synod every 2 years, or is that recent? I heard that they do synod every 2 years.
The CRC did synod, has been doing synod every year, basically from the beginning. The RCA synods have been less regular, but the RCA had a general synod that would meet every 2 to 3 years. Then they had regional synods. Then they had classes. And basically, with their enormous decline, they're just scrapping the whole thing. And, you know, California had, the RCA in California was about the same size as the CRC in California. And I don't know how many churches are left in the RCA in California, maybe 5 or 6, whereas the CRC probably has 100. And in Iowa, they're almost all gone. I mean, the RCA lost about 70% of their membership, but they didn't lose that many churches, because the RCA in the East, the RCA is like the first European Protestant denomination in the New World because of the Dutch.
Right.
And there were, you know, did you ever see the movie First Reformed? You should watch it, because basically it depicts an RCA church that is essentially a museum. And it's kind of being kept alive by a big RCA church, of which they have no more of those anymore. Because almost all the big churches, the growing churches, the younger churches, they all left the RCA. Now the RCA says, we're going to raise $50 million to do church planting. You know, they've just got a hard sell. They want to say, oh, we have a traditional posture on human sexuality, but we're living within the tension because vast segments of our church are doing whatever they want. It's not going anywhere with respect to what's happening with church planting in America. So, I mean, it's just like they're in real trouble.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things you guys are going to struggle with. So, I mean, you don't have to disclose the inner workings of the CRC, but I already know what the answer is because it's everywhere else. The people who are actually giving are older, going to be dying soon. The younger generations are not giving at the level. So you had this more people going to church more of them were tithing or close to tithing, which creates the ability, the Acts 2, we could share anyone who had needs. So rich, Grand Rapids East could support, a struggling area, which we all have enough sort of thing. But that's going away. And, younger people, it's not just about the giving. We're there in a very different economic environment where they don't have as much discretionary and things are expensive. And so the other thing you're really struggling with, we do fundraising here. Okay, we have this donor base, and that donor base is old. It's 60 years and older, or 50 years and older, and we're seeing this cliff there's this cliff about how are we going to fund ourselves. And so with buildings and denominations, it's going to take some really interesting creative thinking of how do we fund ourselves moving forward in a shrinking donation environment.
Actually, I think the CRC is going to be in pretty good shape on that for this reason. We've got a lot of legacy denominational ministries that are probably going to close with the donor base that has traditionally supported them. Mm-hmm. The governance costs we are going to reduce, and I think that needs to happen. But all over America, when churches die, millions of dollars are going to flow into classes. The challenge we have isn't going to be funding church planting. It's going to be using dollars effectively for church planting and there's going to be a windfall. And so in my classes in California, about a year and a half ago, I really pushed to start a committee that is working on this for our classes, so that we're going to come along churches that are probably nearing end of life. We're going to support those churches as well as we can, as long as they want to go. But when they say, we're ready to stop, we've got this building that's worth a lot of money, how can we use this building to plant new churches? And so there'll be a lot of money for church planting. But in the past, the CRC has spent a lot of money on church planting, but it didn't always spend it effectively. And so that's actually the challenge now. And I think also the CRC, a big part of the church that's disaffiliating was sort of the nerve center of the CRC, and that's gone. And so we used to have sort of a hub and spoke denomination where everything was through Grand Rapids. And what I think we really have to move towards is much more a nodal network denomination, where so Scott Vanderpocalypse in Florida is getting traction with church planting. More resources need to go there, and more learning from there and influence there needs to go to other places in the denomination. Same thing in Arizona, same thing in Sacramento, same thing in other places in the denomination. When something starts to flourish, the rest of the denomination needs to understand that flourishing, see if maybe some of that flourishing is transferable, share those leaders. And so instead of a concentrated hub where you have costly geographic institutions in the center, we're going to need more of a distributed network. So, and I think that's really going to be the challenge of the CRC if it's going to adapt to what's going on.
So that's the answer, because you said the churches owned it locally. That money will end up back in the classes and will end up back in the denomination. And so you're going to have this nice, and again, thank God for those people, blood, sweat, and tears, and building those churches and cleanup days for decades. That money will come back in the kingdom, and so close some, invest in others, and that's how you shrink and fund. And it'll be again. So that will be some really smart people who are sharp with money and are entrepreneurial will need to be involved in that. I'm sure you have tons of those types of people in your.
Well, and it's also in the 1970s, when the Christian Reformed Church wanted to plant a church, it looked for Dutch diaspora people, and it sent a pastor who basically did what Christian Reformed people did, and the denomination paid for a building, and that's really nice, but you can only do 2 or 3 of those a year. And so then in the 90s and aughts, we had a lot of church planting going, and we were planting 30, 40 a year. We're not planting at that rate anymore. And we need to, part of it is also sort of where, Aaron Wren's negative world. And so we need to plant different kinds of churches that, for example, our churches in Sacramento, with the exception of Living Stones, if you watched any worship at the Synod, you'll notice that, it sort of looks big box evangelical. We're singing praise songs. Hands are in the air. Words are on the screen. So a lot of people in the CRC think that's the only way that church plants look. And while Hispanic churches look like that, certain churches, usually in the Midwest, look like that. All of our churches in Sacramento that we planted from the 90s and into the 2000s now have weekly communion. They have more structured liturgy. They pay attention to the liturgical calendar. They're not full-blown orthodoxy with icons and vestments. Well, some of them have vestments, but in many places, that's the
Korean church I visited was very high church.
Yeah. So this is, and a lot of people in the Midwest don't know. See, part of the problem is that the CRC is enormously diverse. But when you use that word diversity, people have been trained by the media to think in certain categories. But, you know, so people are talking about the Canadian context. Well, guess what? Vancouver is not the same as Alberta, is not the same as Ontario, is not the same as Halifax. The United States, Western Michigan is not the same as Iowa, is not the same as Florida, is not the same as Central California, is not the same as Southern California. I mean, we're awash in diversity, and coming from a fairly homogenous, monolithic denomination of Dutch immigrants, that's a process of assimilation that continues to sort of move through, and which makes, okay, now that, you know, Aaliyah, Christchurch Davis in Davis, California, very blue state, church that's doing quite well. You know, what are they like? Pastor Christians, he's a Venezuelan in Katy, Texas, with a whole bunch of Venezuelans, and they're singing basically 1980s praise songs.
That's awesome.
So so that's why I hear all the talk of confessionality, because the church is trying to figure out, okay, what do we have in common? How can we trust each other? And that's, you know, really what this synod was about.
Well, I want to say one thing, and I'm going to keep putting it in your head and putting it in your head, because I see this crisis. When you have the money to bivocational pastoring is a setup for disaster. Maybe 10% of people can do it well, and they would be a highly entrepreneurial, have a skill that pays well, that doesn't require, that really is kind of a passive income sort of a bivocational. Because
it's abusive. That's what it is.
I live that world. The thing is that you're always on, you got the pressure to try and provide. Someone calls you at 10 o'clock and their dad died. You're going to their home. Like there's this, and you want to prepare well and you want to serve well. And so you're trying to do both. You got a family you're trying to provide for. There's no pension. There's no, like, it is pastor burnout, even in a very supportive environment like you're in, Paul, is hard, right? It's a real thing. And so I keep seeing all this, and this is mentioned on the Synod floor, but I'm seeing this all over. People think the answer to struggling churches is to not pay the pastor. No, I get it because I can't.
I know, because some people think that's the answer to keeping Living Stones open.
And so it's like, and so part of it is like, it's the consolidation, which is, well, the first thing you shouldn't have is probably have a building. You should make sure you can pay for the pastor first. And then, and I just say that because all my friends who are house church planner guys doing different things or whatever, I've seen it out there. I went through a bivocational cohort with Hugh, I'm forgetting his last name, Halter, maybe his name. He was out of Denver and he had the Bivo book. So I was in this cohort on bivocational. Do you know how many of those guys are? It's like 10 or 15% of the guys can do it, Paul. Yeah. And you set people up for failure. And so then they go out and they fail in their ministry, they fail in their families, and their families are in financial ruin and they have no money. You're setting someone on a path to absolute destruction. I can't speak against bivocational enough.
Yeah.
Abusive. It is abusive. Call it what it is. It is a fraud perpetrated on the most faithful of people.
Yeah, I think you're right that this is going to be an issue going forward, because as the CRC assimilates to the broader American evangelical environment, those pressures are going to be real, and there are going to be more and more bivocational pastors, and we have a few now. And that's usually where you can sort of, work your missional edge and your church planting edge. But I think you're right that it is a short-term, easy thing to embrace, but long-term, there are going to be some real costs to it. And I think some in the CRC are seeing that now. So That's going to be very much something to watch as we continue to try and figure out what church planting models really work well for the CRC.
Well, your committee talked about the support for the spouses of pastors and just trying to recommend, bring it to forefront, a small modicum of money that might go to some of that to let them do that. If we really care about families, like, let's talk about our Christian ideals. If we care about families and wanting, quite frankly, the pastor's family is the leadership family of the church, and look at that. It just puts spouses and children into because children feel that pressure.
Yep.
And if dad's worried about how we're going to eat next week and he's trying to do this and everything, I mean, it's just, so anyway, I'll get off my high horse, but I've heard bivocational mentioned at multiple sentences at multiple times. I mean, not a big thing, but I've heard people mentioning it. And every time I hear that word, I just get triggered. And I'm like, I've seen too many of my friends burn out, and it's been destructive. It's actually caused some divorces, Paul.
Oh yeah. I want to hear. So I've been in Synod. I've been working crazy hours. I've had a social media fast, and there's a war. Just give me 5 minutes. What is happening?
Jacob.
I thought what you were going to say is, Jacob, what have you been thinking about Synod? And my answer was going to be, that I've been rehearsing, is, Paul, you have to realize I am a Persian Jew and there's a war between Iran and Israel. I haven't been watching Synod. I have been watching the Persian language and the Hebrew live news.
So that's why I'm asking you, because suddenly it's like Israel and Iran, and Trump is like, so what is, just give me the skinny. Where's this going, Jacob?
That's a good question. Last night I read an essay I wrote a couple of years ago about the future of Iran on the stream, in which in the essay I said the people who think that the Islamic regime is going to die and there's going to be a constitutional monarchy with Reza Pahlavi again are delusional, as I have believed since I was a little child. They're not as delusional as they used to be. Reza Pahlavi, I was, right before I started the stream, I was listening to him speaking live on a Persian speaking internet channel called Manoto. He is talking about, he is directly addressing military leaders in Iran and asking them to move to support him coming back as the constitutional monarch. I don't think he has a lot of support, but he is the only real alternative available. And the real question depends on whether Israel wants to kill Khamenei. I'm pretty sure they do. Whether Trump is willing to let them kill Khamenei, I'm not sure he will. And if they do kill Khamenei, are they going to kill a bunch of the... There's at least 3 ayatollahs who could be the next ayatollah. And if Trump were to say, kill them all, I have a hard time believing that Netanyahu would. There are reports of Israeli kill squads on the ground in Tehran, like assassinating people in real life. just recently they absolutely turned off the internet in Iran, and that's only been about 12 to 24 hours now. So officially, they're like the regime falling, the Islamic regime falling. I would have given it 0% chance 3 weeks ago. 10% chance, maybe. I try to be very cautious. I mean, obviously, the idea of Reza Shah, maybe returning to Iran. I have family members who would move back. I definitely have family members who have dreamed of moving back. One of my great uncles, he was in his 90s. He just went back to Iran to die, and so what is going on? So Iran has shown itself to be a paper tiger in ways that was not obvious. The idea that Israel would be so able to just wipe out the top leadership, the military, like the military leadership of Iran has been absolutely decimated. And I mean, paper tiger, that's the only thing you can call it. That's what people like. Yeah, I listen. I mean, most of the channels I listen to aren't the delusional regime propaganda. There's one channel my father listens to because it is the regime propaganda, but it's just so delusional. It's like listening to Baghdad Bob. Like, this guy's talking about like what a huge mistake this attack has been for Israel, and like it's like, please have some modicum of like reality to what you are saying. But delusional, I mean, that's what people in the Middle East are used to. I mean, going back to the discussion of the banner, right? It's like, what like what do you expect people to say? Do you expect to actually talk about the fights, or do you want somebody who's actually on your leader and cheerleading, and those are two very different functions. But like when your cheerleaders are so delusional, Israel definitely wants. Are you kidding? Reza Shahzadeh, we should still call him. He doesn't refer to himself as Shah. He calls himself a prince. He went to USC, by the way. He was actually in the U.S. Air Force Academy when the Shah fell. So the United States kind of had to ask him to leave. And he transferred and got his bachelor's in political science from USC. But I mean, he's the only real option out there. And some people are definitely going to call him a puppet. That's for sure. He's definitely way too close to the Saudis and the Israelis. And frankly, I think he uses the Israelis as kind of a cover. If he's going to be a puppet of anyone, it's going to be Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia. The real story is, and I tweeted this out, is all the dogs that are not barking. Saudi Arabia, Hezbollah hasn't been doing anything.
Yeah, that's what I think's been interesting, Jacob.
Iraq hasn't said anything. Pakistan, Afghanistan, like there is a conspiracy of silence in the Middle East. And it seems like a decision had been made a while ago that we're just done with these Ayatollahs.
Yeah.
Because my concern has been, it's like that I don't care whether it's been a Democrat or Republican, all these regime changes, whether it's Clinton or Bush or Obama, all these people that, and then, you know, what we did in Ukraine, it's all failed miserably. So I am so anti-war, anti-warmongers, anti-regime change. I'm highly suspect. And so my biggest question was, and that's why we said on X for You, and I was just curious was, okay, we get rid of these guys. Who the heck are we left with? You know, are you going to create the biggest mass migration crisis in history like Obama did in Syria? Like, what are we going to end up with? Like, it's all these other unintended consequences. I have become so anti-war that I am so suspect of any of it anytime. And so I do care about people who are on the ground, because I had some people that I knew from Syria. That's why I'm listening to Ukrainians about Ukraine. I like to hear people that actually have family living in the country. What do you guys think?
So, I mean, it's hard to gauge what the actual sentiment on the ground is. One of the indications that one of the channels I was listening to really was pointing towards is the number of restaurants in Tehran that serve alcohol openly. Because obviously that's like, if you're going to a restaurant and buying alcohol, like the moonshine trade in Iran is apparently beyond what it was in the United States during Prohibition. Like, it's not even speakeasy anymore. Like, there are actually restaurants in Tehran which, without code words or anything like that, you just go and you order a bottle of moonshine. And one of the complaints has been moonshine can be dangerous to your health, which it can, obviously, right? And if that's an indication of what people think of the theocratic regime, if there are as many restaurants selling moonshine as people claim, and you have to remember the demographic curve in Iran, it kind of looks like this. There are over 60% of Iran is under the age of 14, I believe.
Wow.
For a long time, the fertility rate in Iran was like 5, 6, right? And so there's a very young population who is internet savvy. They're on WhatsApp. They're all using VPNs. Apparently, the use of a VPN in Iran is basically synonymous. Like, if you're going to buy an internet service, which is expensive, you're definitely going to buy a VPN to get access to the open internet.
Yeah.
And all of these people were born after the revolution. I was 2 when the revolution happened. All of these people, all they have known is the revolution. Yeah, I am pretty sure over 60% of the population is under the age of 14 or 15. And so the question becomes, what are these people thinking? And GN says it's 24%. It's still, I mean, what percentage is of it under the age of 30? The demographic curve is definitely, and so the question becomes, are these people who want to see a constitutional monarchy at least similar to, so 50% under the age of 30, apparently. Okay, that's, this is a very young population, and they may be very sick and tired of this regime. And so the idea, and to his credit, Reza Shahzadeh Pahlavi he says, I'm going to be a constitutional monarch. I am going to be King Charles. That is what I want to be. I want to be the symbol of unification. We will have parliamentary elections, right? Which, when you actually know the structure of the Iranian government right now, that's basically what it is, with the supreme leader kind of sort of being a monarch figure, right? So it's not that different from what exists. And so I thought it was delusional because I didn't think it was going to happen. But Iran is functionally a military dictatorship.
Yeah.
It is functionally a military dictatorship. And they decapitated the military.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess a lot will depend on who can. Yeah. I don't know. It looks wild. I got to run, but,
Thanks, Paul.
fun chatting. And thanks, Jacob, for your perspectives on this, because I knew it's like not a lot of people I know both sides of where the missiles are flying. So you are. So
Yeah.
curious about your thoughts. So, all right, y'all. Take care.
Later.
Well, thank you, Jacob, for opening up your channel. I probably need to head too.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny.
But I'm interested in that. So listen, I was, and I always am this way. It shouldn't have shocked me, but let's just say I was highly impressed how Israel just at the snap of a finger took out the entirety of the leadership. And
I wouldn't, if they had confidently said, we can definitely do this, I would have said that they're being a little delusional. If you're confident that you can do it, I mean, it was a risk to attempt it. And Trump, I mean, seems to have played the game of being like, no, hey, it's working. Yeah, that was all me. That was all me, you know?
Well, I still think people can make fun of him all they want. He understands and has been consistent since the 90s. It's not in our benefit to be caught up in these quagmires, right? And so to some extent, if you and BB's there, it's just like, okay, go finish the job, okay? And I don't think they need bunker busters or whatever. And, I think Israel can take out, let's face it, they can take out the Ayatollah. I guarantee they could probably take out the Ayatollahs and their candidates. And if somehow they think that they could bring in, I can't pronounce the name right as beautifully as you did. If there's some way that they think that they could pull that off, awesome,
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, Reza Pahlavi.
Because if he came into power, I think we could get some confidence around not having a nuclear weapon. And I don't think it's.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, look, his grandfather was somewhat of a British puppet. His father was definitely viewed, and part of the whole revolution was he was viewed as an American puppet. And the fact is, if people are willing to take him back in a very real sense, he would be people accepting American, being like, please, we want your McDonald's and blue jeans.
Well, I think for me, just in terms of, you got to think about the cultural context, and I didn't put I've seen his name being floated around Twitter. I just haven't gone down the rabbit trail. But what does, I guess, as I sit here and listen to this, it's actually someone that the people could almost accept, that isn't just some sort of a USA CIA puppet that they can't trust.
No, he's a USA CIA puppet. That
Is he a puppet? But there's familial ties. It sounds like, because that matters, right?
but his father and grandfather were puppets.
Yeah.
The entire dynasty was created by the British.
I get it.
So Jan God asks, guys, answer this question. Is this about Iran and nuclear weapons, or is it about regime change, or is it about something else? Because what else then is this else? And I will say what I always say about any complex situation dealing with a whole nation of people. It is not about one thing or another. It is about many, many different things simultaneously, right? So is it about the nuclear weapons? Yes, it is. Is it about regime change? Yes, it is. Is it about something else? Yes, there are many other else's I could point out. One of them being the Sunni Shia fight between Saudi Arabia and Iran. That is a huge part of what's going on. Another is the fight between Erdogan and Mohammed bin Salman over who is going to be the Sunni caliph of the world. Another is about and you mentioned Xi earlier, is about the balance between the United States and China. Another is Israel's desire and willingness to live with Iran and its Arab neighbors. Another is Putin, and including the fight with Ukraine and Europe with Russia. All of these things are very much speaking to this situation where you have millions of people, right? And so the idea that it is about any one thing, right? I could name you 100 different things, which are all serious considerations in the geopolitics around this, which will all be seriously affected by what happens, and which contribute to whatever will happen. Because and this is another thing I keep on talking about, this isn't billiards, it is fluid dynamics, where after the eddy forms, you can start talking about, oh well, this contributed to the eddy and that contributed to the eddy, but that still doesn't tell you what's going to happen, which is one of the reasons I so detest the dialectical materialists, the people who will tell you, oh, we know how this is going to be. This is going to be Vietnam. This is going to be Iraq. This is going to be World War II. And it's
it's going to work out great either. Yeah, we just don't know.
Well, whatever. I mean, let's say they think it's going. I mean, I was listening to somebody, a Persian language person, who was like, this is going to play out like World War II, in that the United States will take over Germany and Japan. They did that. And so they're going to do the same thing over again, right? And it's like, history rhymes. It does not repeat itself.
You mentioned something that I have also found fascinating, was the deafening silence around what you would think would have been certain people that certainly were voicing at some points very loud voices. I also found that Putin kind of just basically deciding he's going to sit this one out a little bit and having the conversation. First it seemed like he was going to stick his nose in like Syria. Then there's this conversation. And now the other flip side was he basically had a conversation with the regime that basically you need to negotiate. Now, who knows how much of that is true? And yeah, it came out. He said he had public comments. But that, regardless, that's different even from a posturing situation from where he was at with Syria. So there's something different. There's something different going on here, Jay.
The elephant in the room is Mohammed bin Salman. Mohammed bin Salman is making real decisions here. If Mohammed bin Salman, just as much as Trump, he could have said no to this attack. Israeli planes that are whatchamacallit, that are flying into Iran are flying over Jordanian and Syrian airspace. Notice we're not hearing peep from Syria or from Jordan, right? And
Has Turkey been pretty silent too?
well, that's the thing. Syria is a puppet state of Turkey now. Right? So, like, what is actually going on right now, right? There are a lot of dogs not barking. There's a lot of people who are not paying attention to the various things going on. And frankly, I think part of what happened was at the G7, Donald Trump read the room. And the room gave him an impression, oh, this is going places that he didn't necessarily believe the war hawks because he very understandably, I believe, is very skeptical,
wary of the war hawk, wary of the devices
and what comes from our U.S. intelligence. I even have to say that's another person who hasn't been speaking is Tulsi Gabbard. And trust me, Tulsi Gabbard is not beyond deciding, oh, this is a dumb, stupid war. Let me resign from the Trump administration right now as the director of national intelligence. And
it'd be extremely smart strategically if she believed it was going to be a quagmire for her brand.
Right. And let me be the next nominee in 2028 for the Republican thing as the anti-war candidate. Right.
She did come out with some statement because they were bringing up her statement in March where she said they're not close to nuclear weapons. She did come out with another statement basically saying things have changed, yada, yada, yada. She kind of backed off from what she had testified to in March, which is, again, another sign. Again, with Tulsi, I think it bolsters what you're talking about here, right?
So this is another thing. Is Tulsi Gabbard pro-Israel, or she isn't neutral? She is Hindu. She is pro Narendra Modi. And guess what Narendra Modi wants? He is a Hindu national. The BJP party, like that's a whole other thing that we didn't really talk about, right? Is India's role in all of this and India's involvement in all of this. And trust me, does India want another nuclear Muslim state that 100%. Is a close ally of Pakistan? No. Like Narendra Modi has been moving India into close relationship with Saudi Arabia and Israel.
Right? And Trump, there's some people, Trump has a true affection for Modi. You can tell it. They're friendly.
Well, I mean, yeah. I think
he liked Abe Shinzo. Like, though there are just certain people you can tell. I think he respects certain people. I think, even if they, our interests aren't aligned in certain things or whatever, that has been a relationship that you could tell. I think they both respect each other.
I think Trump very much believes in hierarchies and regionals, controls, and I think he looks at the globe as something that can be divided up into regions of power, right? And so I mean, I don't know much about the Indian plane crash. I mean, if you're going to be that much of a conspiracy theorist, you can be, but let me put it this way. Part of the reason Pakistan is probably not, look, what could have happened is that Hezbollah could have decided oh, you're going to attack Iran, we're going to attack right now. Syria, Erdogan, these are not people who love Netanyahu or Israel. Putin could have decided that this is a very good place to take people's eyes off of Ukraine.
Mhm.
I mean, the fact we've started moving American, we've moved 2 American aircraft carriers into the region, into the Middle East, one of which was basically guarding Taiwan, right? There are things, I mean, this could have gone very differently than it has been going.
One of the things I've noted. I'm skeptical. I'm wary. I don't. When it comes to these sorts of things, I don't know who to trust. And as I said this, the one thing is for certain. Let's just focus on Iran. The Iranian people have been suffering under this regime for decades.
Okay. Yes, somewhat. I have to say, I think a majority of Iranians, they felt oppressed by the Shah and his top-down secularity. There was a time when, and he got this straight up from Ataturk in Turkey, the Shah required that anybody who worked for the government, which when you consider all the petroleum was a lot of people, right? If you worked for the government, he required your wife to come pick up your paycheck not wearing a headscarf. Right? Now, imagine the humiliation, the feeling of oppression, and that's, I mean, there's a reason why the headscarf became the touch point that it is, because there was a secularization straight out of Ataturk, right? He was trying to do the Ataturk playbook, which frankly in Turkey there's like Erdogan is a backlash to Ataturk in many ways, right? And Morsi in Egypt was in a very, so this attempt at secularizing Muslim countries is bad and stupid. Okay? It's bad and it's stupid. These are going to be Muslim countries the same way as far more so than England is a Christian country, right? But imagine saying to the British, who are some of the least religious people in the world, no, you can't have your cross on your flag. No, you can't have, you can't have your king be the defender
Or
of
making them
faith.
making them wear hijabs and scarves everywhere immediately. Like, yeah.
Right. And I mean, just I want people to genuinely think what it does to a culture when the best paying jobs are all government jobs in Iran. They certainly were under the Shah. They certainly were for people who were working people, not the landed aristocracy, right? The jobs were working for the government. That's where you made good money. And to demand a Muslim man force his wife to go pick up his effing paycheck, not wearing a scarf, right? To walk outside the house, go to his place of business and pick up his paycheck, right? Like, please,
Well, I get that. So to fast forward now, which is interesting because I went to college with his father had moved here. He was a professor, and they were Iranian or whatever. I would say the reason why maybe my impression I got from him was they wanted to be more secular, and there were basically his family got on the wrong side of the Ayatollahs, and so uncles in jail and stuff like that. They ended up getting to the United States. So there's that. That was happening, even though I totally get the Shah. There's a reason why the revolution happened, right? But now that we also think about the other side, it's curious with all these younger people. If you have all these younger people under 30, which, they're connecting to the internet, most of them, right? Because I would just think young people are, what they might be looking for. So anyway, Jacob, I got to get on the road. I've got to take my wife out to dinner tonight. I'll be listening to you on the ride home. Somebody else jump in with Jacob. I want to keep this conversation going. I'm learning.
Thank you, Lance. Really appreciate your participation. Here we go. This is the 2019 demographic chart in whatchamacallit, on Wikipedia. Look at that curve. Look at that curve. I mean, just, it is what it is. It's because the CIA got rid of Mossadegh, or however you spell it. This drives me nuts, Yon God. It absolutely drives me nuts. By the way, Yon God, you should jump on. Yon God. The idea that if the CIA hadn't undone Mossadegh, it would are you being I hope so. But like it drives me nuts. It absolutely drives me nuts when people point to Mossadegh as if, and people like Jimmy Dore do this all the time. Okay, people, this has been going for over 2 hours. We had a lot of discussion. I think I am going to take a break. I'm going to use host's prerogative to put the Reverend Parcells to bed because he does need to get up in the morning.
Sorry, Reverend. Thank you.
But before he goes, I have a question. Let's say, God forbid, that I were to burn somebody at the stake for not being a Trinitarian. And I did not repent of that. Is that a salvation issue?
Sometimes Jacob takes that devil's advocate thing too
Isn't there
far.
a proverb that says something like, "Don't answer a fool according to his folly"?
But there's a proverb that says, "Answer a fool according to his folly."
There is. Exactly right. I'm going to leave it to you guys to determine, which of those was applicable in this situation as I go. So, but anyhow, good.
Thank you, Reverend.
Good to
Thank
chat
you.
with you all.
Thank you.
Good night.
The